friends, this is the story of Motor Mania, a canceled Tomorrowland attraction that you've probably rode 100 times inside of Fantasyland. Today we are taking a look at some of the earliest development of the happiest place on Earth. Specifically, a look at Walt Disney's favorite land, Fantasyland, but a part of it that actually started as part of Tomorrowland. But before there was a Fantasyland, this attraction was planned for the World of Tomorrow, which I think shows just how far back we're going in the Disneyland timeline today. I mean, we are going far, far, far back to the inception of the idea. Brickey here, breaking down another canceled attraction where the original ideas came from and what they evolved into. You know what we do on this channel, studying Disneyland's past so we can better predict Disneyland's future. Let's go. And this attraction was originally planned for World of Tomorrow, or Futureland. As seen here in one of the earliest proposed overall layouts, they were trying to figure out what Walt's Magic Kingdom would look like. And this artwork produced in 1953, produced by Marvin Davis, not Mark Davis. Here, Disneyland would only be 50 acres and everything is pretty much wildly outdated to what Walt would go on to initially build. And if anybody's curious about making a video breaking down this, just let me know in the comments below. And hey, while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. But this land would go on to be known as Tomorrowland, and then in the 2000s it would get renamed to Sorrowland. Out of all the opening day iconic attractions at Disneyland, none has more of a cult following than Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. But Mr. Toad's Wild Ride wasn't always the theme for this building. There was another one before Toad. The earliest version would have an attraction called Motor Mania, based after a Goofy short film where Goofy essentially is a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde character, where, get this, 50s road rage is what turns him from a normal guy into, is it Hyde the bad guy or Jekyll the bad guy? Well, the bad guy came after the road rage. And instead of the classic ride vehicle that we know today for Mr. Toad, they were going to use bumper car technology because these plans are some of the earliest plans ever drafted for Disneyland. We're going back to 1953. Motor Mania was a 1950s short film starring Goofy where road rage would invoke the monster that would come out inside of him. 75 years later, still happening in LA. The early ride vehicle illustrates just where Disneyland was at in its opening stages, mimicking a lot of its attractions off of classic carnival rides because they hadn't quite dreamt up their own system yet. Disney artist Bruce Bushman was given a very special assignment by Walt Disney. Walt Disney had been spending a tremendous amount of time researching local amusement parks, where Walt would look at traditional theme park attractions and try to envision how could he put the Disney spin on these attractions that already existed. And Disney would pair Bruce Bushman with a local theme park owner. If you've ever been to the Beverly Center, back in the day, that was a theme park called Beverly Park. Walt had become buds with the owner and took his artist, Bruce Bushman, and paired the two together to try to do a study on the existing carnival rides, but how could they put a Disney spin of storytelling on the attractions that already existed? This would be way before WED or Walt Disney Imagineering would exist. This is trying to figure out what's on this shelf that we can co-op into a Disney design. And unbeknownst to the world, the task that these two men were on was simply taking something that had only been known as amusement rides and transferring them over to what the world would come to know as theme park attractions. This is the origin of taking the ride and trying to figure out how do we inject that Disney magic, that story into it, because after all, Walt didn't want to do what had already been done. Walt wanted to do what he was dreaming of. And through this creative endeavor, Bruce Bushman would go on to get the nickname Mr. Fantasyland because of his enormous contributions to Fantasyland and helping Walt carve out how to turn his vision of fantasy into reality. The original vehicle body was like the vehicle from Motor Mania, more of a contemporary car shape for cars that people were driving in the 50s, based off of a Lincoln Zephyr convertible, which I guess was a real car. And this original vehicle would use the bumper car technology, where if you don't know how that works, instead of having a track on the ground, the vehicles have an extending pole that goes up into an electric mesh that runs all along the ceiling. That electric mesh sends the current over to the vehicle, which then powers it. but accuracy is not its forte, and it creates a lot of heat, a lot of energy, and a lot of sparks. And it's extremely slow and not dependable. But the vehicle would transition into what we know today, and this is one of the earliest uses of fiberglass and also extremely heavy. The original cars weighed over 200 pounds, but one of the things that had a huge influence on the inception of Disneyland was the use of a new material called fiberglass, where artists could essentially sculpt any shape that they want, and then the fiberglass would harden and become an almost indestructible surface. And below the shell of the fiberglass would be sheet metal that would give it its structural integrity. But fiberglass single-handedly changed the Disneyland game, giving the Disneyland artisans the ability to basically sculpt out anything that they wanted to create in their park, but know that it could also possess the amount of industrial integrity that it needed to be safe and to be secure with thousands of people using it every single day. But when you ask most folks what was going to go in this building before Toad, there's another answer, which would have been my most favorable outcome for this attraction. Man, oh man, do I wish there was a Sleepy Hollow attraction inside of this building. But I'm sure a Legend of Sleepy Hollow attraction featuring the Headless Horseman was going to have some major obstacles that Disney at that time, Walt Disney Imagineering, then was WED, and I don't think that they had quite been able to figure out how to dream that far just yet. Where mimicking a vehicle, a traditional vehicle, is one thing, but trying to figure out how we would be able to ride on a horse, that's another type of vehicle. I'm sure the limited mechanical articulation of the time, but I'm sure there was a limit to trying to figure out how to make a ride vehicle that would mimic a horse, because don't forget, all of the opening day dark rides inside of Fantasyland, the theme always was we were the central character. So you didn't see a Snow White instead of Snow White, you didn't see a Peter Pan, and you didn't see Mr. Toad. We were always supposed to take the role of the hero, which I guess in this scenario would make us Ichabod Crane, but regardless, we would have to be on a horse to be chased by the Headless Horseman. So that didn't show up, but in my heart of hearts, what a dream. What a dream. That would have been sick, even if it would have been a little perfectly 1950s technology shitty. But eventually, like all inspirations at Disneyland, things do find a home and do find a place where we do see Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman show up each and every fall at Oogie Boogie Bash inside of Disney California Adventure. And we also see the central icon in the hub of Buena Vista Street being a statue of the Headless Horseman, welcoming in the Halloween season every year at DCA. But this concept artwork clearly shows what would go on to be the footprint and pathway for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, even though it started out originally as Motor Mania. And it was clearly no longer going to be able to use a bumper car technology. This was a full-on labyrinth of different paths that you would cruise around inside of your convertible Lincoln. So let's explore this brown line of an attraction that predates Disneyland, when they were just trying to explore how Disney could create some of its own attractions based off of standard carnival rides that existed at the time. But let's do a path-by-path comparison. But this will be a fun exploration of where the ideas started, where the ideas evolved, and all the little difference makers along the way, where you can easily see that reality started to creep into Disney's fantasy. Because I have to say, even though this attraction was pretty primitive in some of its applications, some of these things they didn't do were absolutely genius and still haven't been replicated to date, as far as I know. And this opening day version possessed a couple of really basic special effects that were genius. I mean creative genius on stretching the technology and materials available at the time. But exploring this attraction is one of the things I love to do on this channel, where we look at Disney's past so that we can better predict its future. And I absolutely love exploring the genius creative problem solving that Disneyland has represented over the decades. Friends, if you're enjoying today's video and you would like to see me keep creating 3 videos a week, do me a favor, hit the link below and grab one of these Walt 1901 hoodies. Only available while the channel's in the 40Ks, and the good news is we're already 30% of the way through the journey. Now back to today's video, and thank you so much for supporting Hey Brickey. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was designed to last 1 minute and 38 seconds in order to accommodate about 700 guests an hour. The first difference is that Motor Mania would load outside or in front of the attraction, which is actually how it worked on opening day when it had the Renaissance motif. 1983 in New Fantasyland, the interior load and unload station would be added to help create famous Fantasyland or Bavarian Village look on the exterior. Both attractions take an immediate hard right once you pass the ride operator. Motor Mania would take you through 2 sets of doors, keeping the daylight spillage contained to the center room, which makes me think this was probably how opening day Toad was before the grand entry of Toad Hall was added. Both versions of the ride make a U-turn and then hit a straightaway. Motor Mania takes you on a rural run, while Mr. Toad has you driving a car through his mansion. Rich people, I can't relate. Motor Mania would have you take a sharp left at the end of the straightaway, where you would go through rain effects as you hit the first unique set design feature that shows lo-fi technology can make creative ride narratives. Notice the 3 mirrors your vehicle would reflect into, making it look like you are going into head-on collision. Mr. Toad in this area snakes around and does use mirrors, but more as a background element than a central feature image. Motor Mania would steer you straight into a rock slide, then a fallen tree, and eventually over the edge of a broken bridge, where the rest of the bridge would be placed directly in front of you. As your car takes a hard right, you are now on a bumpy terrain, which begins your off-road adventure. Mr. Toad uses the same northeast corner of the show building to distract you and make you feel like you're lost, with lots of tight turns and objects that feel like near hits and misses. Its bumpy section is set to a shipping port and dock versus the rural set of Motor Mania. Motor Mania would take you directly through a haystack, where on the other side, a pivoting cow would moo and move toward you. As the cop sirens go off on the background, you approach my second favorite part of the attraction, the Cyclorama, where you would pass a rotating canvas to your left. But then, after a quick left, you would have 2 moving canvases on each side of you, making the ride seem faster and more scenic. This shows so much creativity and craftsmanship of low tech, but big ideas. Now this next piece is one of the pieces that absolutely sucked me into this concept artwork, because you can clearly see how they were going to do the grand finale, and what a great use of primitive technology to make some world-class storytelling. Now we weave around the trash cans as we hit the back alley and see a familiar effect of breaking through the brick wall. But unlike where Toad uses a strobe light and flashes, you'll notice they have excavated the land in these plans, so we could drive through a rotating cylinder. Imagine driving straight with the wall spinning all around you. I would love to know what kind of interior effects were planned for the rotating barrels. Would it be stars, city streets, or a spinning wheel that made you feel like you're driving through a portal? At the end, you would reach painted stars, which I would assume would stand for some sort of collision, crash, or afterlife. Because on the other side, instead of going to hell like Toad does, here we're going to heaven, where heavenly music would be playing all around us, maybe clouds spinning on the exterior barrels as we would be going through the pearly gates, which once again are double doors to keep the light spillage from the outside spilling into the interior of the dark ride. Motor Mania was shorter, basically skipping the entire second city scenes and train scene, and sending us to heaven instead of hell. In 1983, when New Fantasyland debuted, all of the rides were extended about 25%, explaining why Toad today has these extra scenes. But according to this drawing, maybe hell was in the plans at some point. The idea of the finale of going through the devil's mouth into hell was okayed by Walt, who felt there should be consequences for reckless driving. Way to go, Walt. But plans changing and adapting is nothing new to Disney or nothing new to the creative process. If you want to see the original plans for Roger Rabbit when it was going to be a 2-story attraction, watch this video right here where I show you the early plans when Roger Rabbit was going to go outside and on the roof. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you for showing up, and most of all, I appreciate your time, and I hope you felt the video was worth it.